To continue the wartime story of Aeroplan Henriot, this is a quick guide to their HD-2. Developed from the largely forgotten HD-1, it is arguably a more significant aircraft, as we shall see. The story of René Henriot and his chief designer, Émile Eugène Dupont, has been covered, albeit briefly, in my preceding presentations on the Ponnier M1 and the aforementioned HD-1. The Henriot HD-2 was conceived as a biplane floatplane fighter intended to escort seaplane reconnaissance aircraft. In an era before aircraft carriers, the idea makes a sort of sense. A few seaplane carriers did exist, examples being the French Foudre and British Hermes, though the latter had been sunk in October 1914. Shore establishments also operated them. Their purpose was reconnaissance and bombing or attack missions. Deck, or even turret, launchers were in the future, and flying boats or floatplanes had to be lowered to the sea via cranes and take off from the surface. Retrieval occurred in the reverse order. So, the value of operating aircraft at sea, or over the sea, was appreciated and in development. In 1915, a short 184 had demonstrated the utility of operating as a torpedo bomber. It is true that the aircraft in question actually launched its torpedo after being forced to land on the ocean, but that still counts. Apparently. As with land-based aircraft with conventional wheeled undercarriages, the importance of escorting such aircraft by fighters seems obvious. In fact, the idea of a seaplane fighter had been around for a few years and proved to be of some utility. I note that I have neglected aviation at sea, which is something I shall address further in the future. Whether there was a specific requirement for a seaplane fighter issued by the French Aviation Maritime, or the Henriot company decided it was a worthwhile endeavour, I have been unable to determine. What is known is that towards the end of 1917, testing commenced on a derivative of the HD-1 that came to be known, perhaps inevitably, as the HD-2. In general design, it was much like the HD-1. However, it was a purpose-built floatplane from the start. Its wings were shorter, but more broad. Not being an expert in aerodynamics, I can only assume that this was to make stowage aboard ships easier, but retaining sufficient lift to operate. To accommodate these changes, the tail surfaces were enlarged. To operate from the ocean's surface, the undercarriage consisted of twin pontoons under the wings, with a third, smaller, beneath the tail. Development revealed that the latter was unnecessary, two alone being sufficient to keep the aircraft at a tail-high attitude. The result was an aircraft of surprisingly modern appearance. Initial armament is reported to have been a single Vickers machine gun offset to the port side, as per the HD-1. This arrangement was undesirable in the field on the HD-1, and so that of the HD-2 was upgraded so that it was equipped with two firing through the propeller arc. This is interesting, as the addition of a second gun on the HD-1 negatively impacted performance due to the extra weight. Given the increased weight of a pontoon undercarriage compared with wheels, I speculate that decreased performance was an inevitability, and so adding extra armament made little difference. Perhaps to offset this, engine power was increased somewhat, with a 130 horsepower Leclerc replacing the 110 horsepower Le Rhône of the HD-1. As a result, the top speed was virtually the same, though the operational ceiling was reduced from 21,000 feet to 15,750. Gross weight had increased from 1,334 to 1,540 pounds. I find it rather impressive that the changes resulted in only a 206-pound increase, though the drag-inducing qualities of the undercarriage would have had inevitable consequences on maneuverability. Regrettably, I have not been able to find commentary on the overall performance and handling of the aircraft. A rather tantalizing prospect would be a comparison between the HD-1 and the HD-2 with a wheeled undercarriage. Indeed, some were manufactured or converted. However, this information too seems to be less than readily available. The operational history I have been able to uncover is sketchy at best. The Aviation Maritime seems to have started using their HD-2s from some point in 1918, certainly well prior to the armistice. They were used as escort fighters, protecting French reconnaissance flying boats operating out of Dunkirk. Some were used as land planes for this purpose, factory-built with wheeled undercarriages. In late 1918, the US was operating a few coastal air stations in the same region, and this brought them into contact with HD-2s being used by the French. This apparently led to the acquisition of 10 of the floatplane versions with the designation HD-2-C. At this point, more information becomes available. As has been stated previously, the aircraft carrier concept was under development. One rather important factor under investigation was the launching of aircraft from warships. Both the French and the Americans performed experiments with their HD-2s to examine this concept, hence this aircraft's historical significance. During 1918, the French were the first to launch an aircraft from a gun turret platform aboard their battleship Paris in Toulon Harbour. This is reported as being an HD-1, although another account states that it was an HD-2. Later, in August and September 1918, similar trials were conducted at Saint-Raphael, with one of the HD-2 prototypes converted to landplane form and re-engined with a 120 horsepower Lorraine. The attached picture is actually one of the US experiments because I don't have pictures of the French efforts. I should clarify that this is not the same as being the first to launch an aircraft from a ship. That honor belongs to the US. On November 14, 1910, the US military took its first step toward linking flight and naval operations when Eugene Ely made the first carrier takeoff, guiding a Curtiss pusher biplane off the deck of the light cruiser USS Birmingham in the waters of Norfolk, Virginia. Subsequently, the French Navy converted some of their HD-2s to wheel configuration and used them for trials on the new aircraft carrier Béarn. It is recorded that the American HD-2s were acquired as seaplanes, but were sent to the U.S. Naval Aircraft Factory at League Island, Philadelphia, for conversion to land planes. These were used for training in combat flying, and at least one was flown from a gun turret platform on the USS Mississippi in 1919. This aircraft had a large wind-driven generator mounted on the port lower wing, suggesting that it may have had an early radio telephony installation. 4 other HD-2 landplanes were used by the 2nd Shipplane Unit that began its training activities at Langley Field on 28th of May 1919. The Orias survived at least these early U.S. Navy activities, for in the report of the Navy Department of Aircraft on hand on 1st November 1919, all 10 Orias were listed. It is of interest, in view of their origin, to note that they were even at that date recorded as Henriot seaplanes. A final experiment in launching an HD-2 from a ship was carried out by the French in 1924 with 2 new-built examples designated H-29s. Apologies for the lousy picture quality. An unorthodox launching system was developed, where the aircraft were equipped with 3 small pulley wheels, one on each tip of the upper wing and one at the tip of the tail fin. These ran along metal rails that had been attached to project horizontally from the mast of the battleship Lorraine. This did not work as hoped, succeeding only in depositing the aircraft into the water below. Further trials were discontinued. Perhaps 100 Henriot HD-2s were manufactured. Unfortunately, none are known to survive.